Good evening and welcome to Sun Meadow Temple. We are so happy you joined us. My name is Alba and I use she, her pronouns. This is our first May Observance and I'm so happy you are here. As always, this service is recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. We invite you to participate in our ongoing Wax Museum project, Pentagram project, and we'll be soon starting audiobooks. So, if anyone would like to participate in any of these events, please use the forms on our social medias to register for them. We will open today with our opening words, which will appear on the slide behind you. Please listen as I read the words aloud or read them aloud along with me at home. We welcome you into the light of the gods and light this flame in celebration. May its brightness symbolize our connection to the gods and the natural world. May you join us in this community of faith, cherishing love and with open hearts. So our theme for this month is Man as Creator, and our readings today are from Hesiod's Theogony, Works in Days, translated by Charles Abraham Elton, Prometheus Bound, thought to be by Aeschylus, but actually probably not, translated by Theodore Alois Buckley, and Protagoras by Plato, translated by Benjamin Jowett. And just a note before we begin with Theogony, one of these works will discuss the Sophists, and the Sophists are a group of people who teach public speaking and rhetoric to wealthy students for a fee in ancient Greece, and they would generally travel about between houses. So you will need to know slightly who they are for this thing to be relevant. So we will start with Theogony. Iaptus ascends the bed of love with Clymene, fair-ankled ocean nymph. She brought forth Atlas, her undaunted son, glorying Meneutheus and Prometheus versed in changeful turns and shifting subtleties, and Epimetheus of unwary mind, who from old time became an evil curse to man's inventive race, for he received the clay-formed virgin woman sent from Jove. All-seeing Jove struck with his smoldering flash haughty Meneuetus and cast down to hell, shameless in crime and arrogant in strength. Atlas, enforced by stern necessity, props the broad heaven on earth's fair borders, where in the full opposite the Hesperian virgins sing. With shrill, sweet voice he rears his head and hands. I, unfatigable, heaven's counselor so doomed his lot, but with enduring change he bound Prometheus, trained in shifting wiles, with galling shackles fixing him aloft, midway a column. Down he sent from high, his eagle hovering on expanded wings. She gorged his liver, still beneath her beak immortal, for it sprang with life and grew in the night season, and repaired the waste of what the wide-winged bird devoured by day. But her the fair Alcmena's hardy son slew, from Prometheus drove the cruel plague, and freed him from his pangs. Olympian Jove, who reigns on high, consented to the deed, that thence yet higher glory might arise o'er peopled earth, to Hercules of Thebes, and in his honor Jove now made to cease the wrath he felt before, against him who strove in wisdom even with Saturn's mighty son. Of yore when strife arose for sacrifice twixt gods and men, with Mecona's walls Prometheus willful parted a huge ox and set before the god, so tempting him with purpose to deceive, for here he laid the unctuous substance, entrails and the flesh, close covered with the belly of the hide. There the white bones he craftily disposed, and with a marrowy substance wrapped them round. Then spake the father of the gods and men, Son of Iaptus, thou famous god, how partial friend are thy divided shares. So in rebuke spoke Jupiter, whose thoughts of wisdom perish not. Then answered him wily Prometheus with the laugh suppressed, and well remembering his insidious fraud, Hail, glorious Jove, thou mightiest of the gods, who shall endure forever. Choose the one which now the spirit in thy breast persuades. He spoke, revolving treachery. Jove, who thoughts of wisdom perish never, knew the guile, not unforewarned, and straight his soul devised evil to mortals, that it should surely be. He raised the snowy portion with his hands, and felt his spirit wroth. Ye anger seized his spirit when he saw the whitening bones, o'erlaid with cunning artifice, and thence, e'en from that hour, the dwellers upon earth consume the whitening bones, when climbs the smoke wreath from their flaming altars. Then again, cloud-gatherer Jove with indignation spake, Son of Iaptus, of all most wise, still, friend, rememberest thou thy arts of guile? So spake incensed the god whose wisdom yields to no decay, and from that very hour, remembering the treachery, he denied the strength of indefatigable fire to all the dwellers upon earth. But him benevolent Prometheus did beguile, for in a hollow reed he stole from high the far-seen splendor of unwearied flame. Then deep resentment stung the thunderer's soul, and his heart chafed in anger when he saw the far fire gleaming in the midst of men. And for the flame restored, he straight devised a mischief to mankind. At Jove's behest, famed Vulcan fashioned from the yielding clay a bashful virgin's likeness, and the maid of azure eyes, Minerva, round her waist clasped the broad zone, and dressed her limbs in robe of flowing whiteness placed upon her head. A wondrous veil of variegated threads entwined among her hair delicious wreaths of verdant herbage and blooming flowers, and set a golden mitre on her brow, which Vulcan framed and with adorning hands wrought at the pleasure of his father Jove. Rich laboured figures marvellous to sight encased the border, forms of beasts that range the earth and fishes of the rolling deep. Of these innumerable he there had graven, and exquisite the beauty of his art shone in these wonders like to animals, moving in breath with vocal sounds of life. Now when his plastic hand instead of good had framed this beauteous bane, he led her forth where were the other gods and mingled men. She went exulting in her graced array, which Pallas, daughter of a mighty sire, known best by her eyes of azure, had bestowed. On gods and men in that same moment seized the ravishment of wonder when they saw the deep deceit, the inextricable snare. From her the sex of tender woman springs, pernicious is the race, the woman tribe dwell upon earth, a mighty bane to men. No mates for wasting want but luxury, and as within the closed-roofed hive of the drones, helpers of sloth are pampered by the bees, these all the day till sinks the ruddy sun. Haste on the wing, their murmuring labours ply, and still cement the white and waxen comb. Those lurk within the covered hive, and reap with glutted maw the fruits of others' toil. Such evil did the slanderer send to men in woman's form, so he gave the sex ill helpmates of intolerable toils, yet more of ill instead of good he gave. The man who shunning wedlock thinks to shun the vexing cares that haunt the woman's state, and lonely waxes old, shall feel the want of one to foster his declining years. Though not his life be needy, yet his death shall scatter his possessions to strange heirs and aliens from his blood. Or if his lot be marriage, and his spouse of modest fame congeal to his heart, e'en then shall ill for ever struggle with the partial good and cling to his condition. But the man who gains the woman of injurious kind lives bearing in his secret soul and heart inevitable sorrow, ill so deep as all the balms of medicine cannot cure. Therefore is not lawful to elude the eye of heaven, nor mock the omniscient mind. For not Prometheus the benevolent could shun heaven's heavy wrath, and vain were all his arts of various wisdom, vain to scape necessity or loose the mighty chain. So we'll now move on to the version of the story that Hesiod tells later in Works and Days. O Persis, thou within thy secret breast repose the maxims by my care impressed, nor ever let that evil joying strife have power to wean thee from the toils of life. Though whilst thy prying eyes the forum draws, thine ears the process and the din of laws, small care be his of wrangling and debate, for whose ungathered food the garners wait. Who once within the summer's plenty stored earth's kindly fruits and Sarah's yearly hoard, with these replenished at the brawling bar, for others' wealth go instigate the war. But this thou mayest no more, let justice guide, best boon of heaven, and future strife decide. Not so we shared the patrimonial land, when greedy pillage filled thy grasping hand. The bride devouring judges lulled by thee, the sentence gave and stamped the false decree. O fools who know not in their selfish soul how far the half is better than the whole. The good which Afstall and mallows yield, the feast of herbs, the dainties of the field. The food of man in deep concealment lies, the angry gods have hid it from our eyes. Else had one day bestowed sufficient cheer, and, though inactive, fed thee through the year. Then might thy hand have laid the rudder by, in blackening smoke for ever hung on high. Then had the laboring ox forgone the soil, and the patient mules had found reprieve from toil. But Jove concealed our food and sensed it hard, since mocked by wise Prometheus' wily art. Sore ills to man devised the heavenly sire, and hid the shining element of fire. Prometheus then, benevolent of soul, in hollow reed the spark recovering stole, cheering to man, and mocked the god whose gaze serene rejoices on the lightning's blaze. O son of Japhet, with indignant heart, spake the cloud-gatherer, O unmatched in art, exultest thou in this flame retrieved, and dost thou triumph in the god deceived? But thou with posterity of man shall rule the fraud whence mightier ills began. I will send an evil for thy stealthy fire, an ill which all shall love and all desire. So that is the end of the section from Works and Days. Unfortunately, I cut the bit describing Pandora because it was going to be too long. So we'll now move into Prometheus Bound, which is the same story, but this one is told later and by Aeschylus. And I will say before I read each section who is speaking, because this is a play. So, chorus. Unfold and speak out to us the whole story. From what accusation has Jupiter seized thee, and is thus disgracefully and bitterly tormenting thee? Inform us if thou be in no respect hurt by the recital. Prometheus. Painful indeed are these things for me to tell, and painful too for me to hold my peace, and in every way grievous. As soon as the divinities began discord, and a feud was stirred up among them with one another, one party wishing to eject Saturn from his throne, in order forsooth that Jupiter might be king, and others expediting the reverse, that Jupiter might at no time rule over the gods, then I, when I gave the best advice, was not able to prevail upon the Titans, children of Uranus and Terra, but they, contemning in their stout spirits wily schemes, fancied that without any trouble, and by dint of main force, they were to win the sovereignty. But it was not only that my mother Themis and Terra, a single person with many titles, had forewarned me of the way in which the future would be accomplished, how it was destined, that not by main force, nor by the strong hand, but by craft of victor should prevail. When, however, I explained such points in discourse, they deigned not to pay me any regard at all. Of the plans which they presented themselves to me, the best appeared that I should stake my mother and promptly side with Jupiter, who was right willing to receive us. And 'tis by means of my counsels that the murky abyss of Tartarus overwhelms the antique Saturn allies and all. After thus being assisted by me, the tyrant of the gods hath recompensed me with this foul recompense. For somehow his malady attaches to tyranny, not to put confidence in its friends. But for your inquiries upon what change it is that he outrages me, this I will make clear. As soon as he has established himself on his father's throne, he assigned forthwith the different divinities for each his honors, and when he was marshalling the order in his empire, but of woe-begone mortals he made no account, but wished after having annihilated the entire race to plant a new one. And these schemes no one opposed except myself, but I dared. I ransomed mortals from being utterly destroyed and going down to Hades. 'Tis for this in truth I am bent by sufferings such as these, agonizing to endure and piteous to look upon. I that had compassion for mortals have myself been deemed unworthy to obtain this, but mercilessly am thus coerced to order a spectacle inglorious to Jupiter. Chorus. Iron-hearted and formed of rock, to Prometheus is he, who condoles not with thy toils, for I could have wished never to have beheld them, and now, when I behold them, I am pained in my heart. Prometheus. Aye, in very deed I am piteous object for friends to behold. Chorus. And didst thou chance to advance even beyond this? Prometheus. Yes, I prevented mortals from foreseeing their doom. Chorus. By finding what remedy for this malady. Prometheus. I caused blind hopes to dwell within them. Chorus. In this thou gavest a mighty benefit to mortals. Prometheus. Over and above these boons, however, I imparted fire to them. Chorus. And do the creatures of day now possess bright fire? Prometheus. Yes, from which they will moreover thoroughly learn many arts. Chorus. It is indeed on changes such as these that Jupiter is both visiting thee with indignities, and no wise grants thee a respite from thy pains, and is no period to thy toils set before thee. Prometheus. None other assuredly, but when it may please him. Chorus. And how shall it be his good pleasure? What hope is there? Seest thou not that thou didst err, but how thou didst err, I cannot relate with pleasure, and it would be a pain to you. But let us leave these points and search through for some escape from thine agony. Prometheus. 'Tis easy for any one that hath his foot untangled by sufferings, both to exhort and to admonish him that is in evil plight. But I knew all these things willingly I erred, and I will not gainsay it. And in doing service to mortals I brought upon myself sufferings. Yet not at all did I imagine that, in such a punishment as this, I was to wither away upon lofty rocks, meeting with this desolate solely crag, and yet to wail ye not over my present sorrows, but after alighting on ground, list ye to the fortune that is coming, that ye may learn the whole throughout. Yield ye, and take a share in the woes of him that is now suffering. Hence in the same way doth calamity, roaming to and fro, settle down upon different individuals. Chorus. Upon those who are nothing loth hast thou urged this, Prometheus, and now having with light step quitted my rapidly wafted chariot seat, and the pure aether highway of the feathered race, I will draw near to this rugged ground, and I long to hear the whole tale of thy sufferings. Okay, and now we are on to the final section, Protagoras, which is by Plato. This is not one of his more popular ones. You probably won't have heard this one before. Suppose, said Callias, that we hold a council in which you may sit and discuss. This was agreed upon, and the great delight was felt at the prospect of hearing wise men talk. We ourselves took the chairs and benches and arranged them by Hippias, where the other benches had already been placed. Meanwhile Callias and Alcibiades got Prodicus out of bed and brought in him and his companions. When we were all seated, Protagoras said, Now that the company are assembled, Socrates, tell me about the young man of whom you were just speaking. I replied, I will begin again at the same point, Protagoras, and tell you once more of the purport of my visit. This is my friend Hippocrates, who is desirous of making your acquaintance. He would like to know what will happen to him if he associates with you. I have no more to say. Protagoras answered, Young man, if you associate with me, on the very first day you will return home a better man than you came, and better on the second day than on the first, and better on every day that you were on the day before. When I heard this, I said, Protagoras, I do not at all wonder at hearing you say this. Even at your age, and with all your wisdom, if anyone were to teach you what you did not know before, you would become better, no doubt. But please to answer in a different way. I will explain by an example. Let me suppose that Hippocrates, instead of desiring your acquaintance, wished to become acquainted with the young man Zeuxippus of Heraclea, who has lately been in Athens. And he had come to him as he has come to you, and had heard him say, as he heard you say, that every day he would grow and become better if he associated with him. And then suppose that he were to ask him, In what shall I become better? And in what shall I grow? Zeuxippus would answer, In painting. And of course then that he went to Pythagoras the Theban, and heard him say the same thing, and ask him, In what shall I become better day by day? And he would reply, In flute playing. Now I want you to make the same sort of answer to this young man and to me, who am asking a question on his account. When you say that on the first day which he associates with you, he will turn home a better man, and on every day he will grow in like manner, in what, Protagoras, will he be better, and about what? When Protagoras heard me say this, he replied, You ask questions fairly, and I like to answer a question which is fairly put. If Hippocrates comes to me, he will not only experience the sort of drudgery with which other sophists are in the habit of insulting their pupils, who, when they have just escaped from the arts and are taken and driven back to them by these teachers, and made to learn calculation and astronomy and geometry and music. He gave a look at Hippias as he said this. But if he comes to me, he will learn that which he comes to learn. And this is prudence in affairs private as well as public. He will learn to order his own house in the best manner, and he will be able to speak and act for the best affairs of the state. Do I understand you, I said, and is your meaning that you teach the art of politics and that you promise to make men good citizens? That, Socrates, is exactly the profession which I make. Then I said, You do indeed possess a noble art, if there is no mistake about this, for I will freely confess to you, Protagoras, that I have a doubt whether this art is capable of being taught, and yet I know not how to disbelieve your assertion, and I ought to tell you why I am of the opinion that this art cannot be taught or communicated by man to man. I say that the Athenians are an understanding people, and indeed they are esteemed to be such by the other Hellenists. Now I observe that when we are met together in the assembly, and the matter in hand relates to building, the builders are summoned as advisers. But when the question is one of shipbuilding, the shipwrights are, and the like of other arts which they think capable of being taught and learned. And if some person offers to give them advice, who is not supposed by them to have skill in the art, even though he be good-looking and rich and noble, they will not listen to him but laugh and hoot at him, until he is either clamoured down and retires of himself, or if he persist, he is dragged away or put out by the constables at the command of the Parentanes. This is their way of behaving about the professors of the arts. But when the question is an affair of state, then everybody is free to have a say. Carpenter, tinker, cobbler, sailor, passenger, rich and poor, high and low. Anyone who likes gets up, and no one reproaches him, as in the former case, with not having learned and having no teacher, and yet giving advice, evidently because they are under the impression that this sort of knowledge cannot be taught. And not only is this true of the state, but of individuals. The best and wisest of our citizens are unable to impart their political wisdom to others, as, for example, Pericles, the father of these young men, who gave them excellent instruction in all that could be learned from masters, in his own department of politics neither taught them nor gave them teachers, but they were allowed to wander at their own free will in a sort of hope that they would light upon virtue of their own accord. Or take another example. There was Cleinias, the younger brother of our friend Alcibiades, who of this very same Pericles was the guardian, and he being in fact under the apprehension that Cleinias would be corrupted by Alcibiades, took him away and placed him in the house of Arphron to be educated, but before 6 months had elapsed, Arphron sent him back, not knowing what to do with him. And I could mention numberless other instances of persons who were good themselves and never yet made anyone else good, whether friend or stranger. Now I, Protagoras, having these examples before me, am inclined to think that virtue cannot be taught. But then again, when I listen to your words, I waver, and I am disposed to think that there must be something in what you say, because I know you have great experience and learning and intervention, and I wish that you would, if possible, show me a little more that virtue can be taught. Will you be so good? That I will, Socrates, and gladly. But what would you like? Shall I, as an elder, speak to you as the younger men in an apology or myth, or shall I argue out the question? To this several of the company answered that he should choose for himself. Well then, he said, that I think the myth will be much more interesting. Once upon a time there were gods only and no mortal creatures, but when time came that these also should be created, the gods fashioned them out of earth and fire and various mixtures of both elements in the interior of the earth, and when they were about to bring them into the light of day, they ordered Prometheus and Epimetheus to equip them and to distribute to them severally their proper qualities. Epimetheus said to Prometheus, "Let me distribute, and do you inspect." This was agreed, and Epimetheus made the distribution. There were some to whom he gave strength without swiftness, while he equipped the weaker with swiftness. Some he armed, and others he left unarmed, and devised for the latter some other means of preservation, making some large and having their size as a protection, others small, whose nature was to fly in the air or burrow in the ground. This was to be the way of their escape. Thus did he compensate them with the view of preventing any race from becoming extinct. And when he had provided against their destruction by one another, he contrived also a means of protecting them against the seasons of heaven, clothing them with close hair and thick skin, sufficient to defend them against winter cold and able to resist the summer heat, so that they might have a natural bed of their own when they wanted to rest. Also he furnished them with hooves and hair, and hard and callous skins under their feet, and then he gave them varieties of food, herbs of the soil to some, to others fruits of the trees, and to others roots, and to some again he gave other animals as food. And some he made to have few young ones, while those who were in their prey were very prolific, and in this manner the race was preserved. Thus did Epimetheus, who, not being very wise, forgot that he had distributed among the brute animals all the qualities which he had to give, and when he came to man, who was still unprovided, he was terribly perplexed. Now, while he was in this perplexity, Prometheus came to inspect the distribution, and he found that the other animals were suitably furnished, but that man alone was naked and shoeless, and had neither bed nor arms of defense. The appointed hour was approaching when man in his turn was to go forth into the light of day, and Prometheus, not knowing how he could devise his salvation, stole the mechanical arts of Hephaestus and Athene, and fire within them. They could neither have been acquired nor used without fire, and gave them to man. Thus man had the wisdom necessary to support of life, but political wisdom he had not, for that was in the keeping of Zeus, and the power of Prometheus did not extend to entering the citadel of heaven, where Zeus dwelt, who moreover had terrible sentinels, but he did enter by stealth into the common workshop of Athene and Hephaestus, in which they used to practice their favorite arts, and carried off Hephaestus' art of working by fire, and also the art of Athene, and gave them to man. And in this way man was supplied with the means of life. But Prometheus is said to have been afterwards prosecuted for theft, owing to the blunder of Epimetheus. Now man, having shared the divine attributes, was at first the only one of the animals who had any gods, because he alone was one of their kindred, and he would raise altars and images of them. He was not long in inventing articulate speech and names, and he also constructed houses and clothes and shoes and beds, and drew sustenance from the earth. Thus provided, mankind at first lived dispersed, and there were no cities, but the consequence was that they were destroyed by the wild beasts, for they were utterly weak in comparison of them, and their art was only sufficient to provide them with the means of life, and did not enable them to carry war on the animals. Food they had, but not yet the art of government, of which the art of war is a part. After a while, the desire of self-preservation gathered them into cities, but when they were gathered together, having no art of government, evil entreated one another, and were again in the process of dispersion and destruction. Zeus feared that the entire race would be exterminated, so he sent Hermes to them, bearing reverence and justice to be ordering principles of cities, and the bonds of friendship and conciliation. Hermes asked Zeus how he should impart justice and reverence among men. Should he distribute them as the arts are distributed, that is to say, to a favored few, only one skilled individual, having enough of medicine or of any other art for many unskilled ones? Shall this be the manner in which I am to distribute justice and reverence to all men? Or shall I give them to all? To all, said Zeus. I should like for them to all have a share, for cities cannot exist if only a few share in the virtues, as in the arts. And further, make a law by my order that he who has no part in reverence and justice shall be put to death, for he is the plague of this state. And this is the reason, Socrates, why the Athenians and mankind in general, when the question relates to carpentry or other mechanical art, allow but a few to share in their deliberations, and when any one else interferes, they say, as you say, they object, if he be not the favored few, which, as I reply, is very natural. But when they meet to deliberate about political virtue, which proceeds only by way of justice and wisdom, they are patient enough of any man who speaks of them, as is also natural, because they think that every man ought to share in the sort of virtue, and that states could not exist if this were otherwise. I have explained to you, Socrates, the reason of this phenomenon. And that is our end for today, and this ended up being incredibly long, so I am going to generally skip the discussion, but I really hope that you can see the theme of man as creator in each of these texts, as man as the creator of government, and as the creator of certain and user of certain skills, and as the creator of products and other things for the gods, such as altars and offerings. So we'll now move into the ritual portion of the observance, and I will play the video. To symbolize our connection and devotion. We gift this rock to symbolize the stability of the gods in our world. We gift this water to accept the flow of our lives. We welcome life and bless our offerings with oil to share our riches. We embrace our connection to each other and the world and celebrate our revival. We'll now move into the closing words, and as usual, you can listen as I read the words aloud or read them aloud along with me. As we move out into the world, let us remember our community of faith. Cherish love and open your heart as you walk through life. Hold dear the light of the gods and our connection with the natural world. Go forth in celebration and carry the light of connection within your heart.